In April, the UK Supreme Court ruled that under the law, the word woman means biological female.
I agree with Chimamanda that trans women are not women. Trans women are trans women. If you live your first 20 years as a man, the gender dysmorphia that you suffered that eventually led you to trans, that gender dysmorphia is a completely different and unique experience from actual womanhood.
When trans people go through gender reassignment, they are given a certificate called Gender Recognition Certificate. That allows people to recognize their new sex. Basically, their new gender, right? It kind of weakens the power that certificate has. If a trans woman says I'm a woman, they can say no, you're not a woman because by law you're not a woman. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Scatterayam Podcast, where we discuss how society affects behavior. I'm your host, Dr. Toves, and today's conversation is going to be an interesting one because we're talking about identity. Legal identity, personal identity, and really who gets to say and decide who you are. But joining me to Scatterayam about this topic is my guy from another mother in another country. The liberal one, I would say, the most liberal person I know, Mr. Seun T. How are you feeling today, sir?
I'm doing well. If I'm the most liberal person that you know, then that's interesting. That says something definitely about your network. I'm not sure what it says, exactly, but it says something.
No, it doesn't say anything. It says I don't have a network.
Okay.
That's what it says. Yeah, I don't network that much. Unless professionally, obviously. But
Yeah, but I mean, like within like your friends, your family, the people you know, like people like me you went to school with, all that kind of stuff. I guess like to be fair, I am quite far on the spectrum. In
exactly.
terms of like
I'm glad you recognize that.
sure.
Yeah, but yeah, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the gender. I don't know if you guys heard about the recent UK Supreme Court ruling in April, just not long ago. That got a lot of people talking, a lot of people marching, a lot of people protesting, and let's be honest, some people quietly rethinking where they stand. But I promise I'm not going to give you a law lecture, but we'll just keep it light and reflective, and as always, rooted in the big question: how does this thing affect the way people behave? So here is the thing: in April this year, 2025, the UK Supreme Court just ruled that under the law, the word woman means biological female, regardless of whether someone has transitioned or holds a gender recognition certificate. If you're wondering what is a gender recognition certificate, that is for people who have undergone surgery and transitioned from their biological sex into it's biological and what the other called the other sex now? Is it acquired?
Assigned,
Is it?
assigned
Oh,
biological or well, like let's make a distinction, right? And I'm just
yeah,
jumping in here.
yeah,
I think what those of us on the left side of the spectrum suggests is that there's a difference between sex and gender. That sex is biological, based on what you are assigned at birth, based on what you come out with at birth. So you either come out with a vagina or a penis, or for the intersex people, a specific biological class, you could come out with both. Now that's different from gender, which is a socialized thing, right? So gender is something that you identify visually or culturally or socially. So women like pink, men like blue and black. Um, Women use makeup, men don't. These are all gender identifiers that are very
yeah,
subjective, change over time, and have nothing to do with sex. Now the
yes.
question of how trans people are classified is a
Mm-hmm.
seemingly controversial one. And I'm going to
Okay.
contradict your statement that I'm the most liberal person you know, because my view on
Mm-hmm.
this isn't considered like fully liberal. I agree with Chimamanda. Chimamanda got into some trouble a couple of years ago when she said something along these
Okay.
lines that trans women are trans women, trans women are
Mm-hmm.
not women.
And J.K. Rowling as well.
J.K. Rowling is definitely one of the biggest boogeymen for the
Mm-hmm.
trans this thing, right?
Yeah.
I think she kind of leans into it and participates in the back and forth. But from my perspective, I agree. I think trans woman, quote unquote, is a separate and distinct category
Okay.
from
But
from being a woman. Yeah.
Right. So let me just go back to give people the background, and we'll get into all of this, right?
Mm.
Yeah. So the reason why the case was in the Supreme Court in the first place was because in Scotland they're trying to promote women into more leadership roles in government, and so there is this feminist group called For Women Scotland. Took the case to the Supreme Court to try to clarify that whether trans women are considered women under the Equality Act. In the UK, there's a anti-discrimination law called the Equality Act of 2010, where you can't discriminate on people based on name, based on ethnicity, not name, based on race, ethnicity, gender, able body, or all those kind of things. So there's already a classification for gender reassignment. There's a classification for sexual orientation as well, which is kind of linked to what you're saying. They try to piece it out. You can't discriminate for sexual orientation. You cannot discriminate based on gender reassignment. You cannot discriminate based on sex.
Yes, those are referred to as protected classes. We have the same thing in America.
Protected characteristics. Yeah. So they went to the court to try to clarify if transgender women are protected under women, so that they know which people are going to be promoted when they say women are being promoted. But the UK Supreme Court clarified that in their protection, sex means biological sex, not reassigned sex. So that's basically some people literally were popping champagne in the steps of the Supreme Court, and that created a lot of noise and back and forth. But for me, the question I want to ask is where do people draw the line? First of all, because we know that society get to decide what people are in the first place. Now in the UK, they've basically clarified that transgender women are not considered women. So it means that it might affect all of these single safe spaces like toilets. Now it means trans women may not be able to use women-only toilets anymore based on this law.
Let's make a distinction between two things, right? Because the idea of protected classes, it's an old one. It exists in the US as well. The Civil Rights Act, as old as 1960 something, creates protected classes. So you cannot discriminate on the basis of race, sex, religion, all the kind of things. In the UK, the protected class list is much longer than in the US. But let's make a distinction between how the law recognizes sex. So for the purpose of the law recognizing sex, there's male and female, and it's what you're born with. So if you're a trans person, you cannot benefit from specific government policies that are directed at women. So that's a separate thing. There's the social aspect of things. Right. The other question is, okay, what does that mean for you as an individual person walking on the street or living around other people in the society? And for me, it doesn't affect anything there, because if somebody is presenting themselves as a woman, if somebody is presenting themselves as trans or as a woman, you should address them with the pronoun that they would like to be addressed, treat them the way that they would like to be treated. You can go about your life like that. From my perspective, the bathroom issue is not a serious one necessarily.
Okay, it's not but it kind of enters this conversation. I forgot that when you're talking, you made me remember that I did not include something in my little briefing. Right, in the UK, I don't know about in the US. Like when trans people go through the gender reassignment, they are given a certificate called Gender Recognition Certificate. Right, so that Gender Recognition Certificate allows people to recognize their new sex, basically their new gender, right? So if the Scottish people, for Scotland, women now have basically made the Supreme Court to say when they're promoting women into leadership, that trans women are not involved, which kind of brought the question that what about this gender recognition certificate, because it kind of weakens the power that certificate has. So if people don't want to call you woman anymore because by law now you're not a woman, then obviously that is creating more chaos and confusion in a way.
That's why I wanted to make the distinction between the law, right? So something you might hear something like the Latin word is de jure and de facto. So a de facto something is something that we all do as a matter of like norm or common behavior. So that's the de facto policy. De jure
Mm-hmm.
means it's written into the law. So I think
Yeah.
in this case, right, if you're doing anything with the government, if you work for the government, if you're doing anything that requires you to adhere to legal policy,
Mm-hmm.
legally in the UK, according to the Supreme Court ruling, the classification of woman, quote unquote, does not include trans woman. Now that
Mm-hmm.
is a legal thing, right? As an individual person socially who is moving through the world,
Mm-hmm.
whether or not, so if you see somebody who is, if you see somebody who is presenting themselves as like a woman, and they're trans or whatever, but they're presenting as
Mm-hmm.
a woman, they have socially transitioned, maybe they've even biologically transitioned as well. um
Mm-hmm.
how do you then treat them, right? And that becomes a question of like individual values around kindness,
Yes.
politeness, respect,
Yes.
and all that kind of stuff. So, like, if you misgender somebody intentionally, if you treat them a particular way intentionally, and you claim that the Supreme Court ruling gives you the authority to do that, you're just being an
No, no,
asshole.
no. Yes, no, I agree. I agree with that. Right, you treat them humanely, but there's some people like this activist group now. They can now say if a trans woman says I'm a woman, they can say no, you're not a woman because by law you're not a woman.
Nobody stopped you
Or
from
like
being able to say
if
that before.
true, true. But now there's a legal backing. You see what I'm saying? Like that I think that was kind of the conversation that people were having. Not just people that were trans, but people that like are also like allies, as they say
Yeah.
in quote, right? Because now it's giving room for more discrimination. People can be like, okay, this is a woman's bathroom. It is said women's only bathroom, and by law you're not a woman, so you should go and use your biological bathroom.
No,
That's why I
but
brought
yeah,
the
no, the reason,
toilet kind of satire into it. But
my response to the toilet thing and why I'm saying it's not a real problem, it's a fake problem, is that like you can simply
mhm.
have a single stall unisex bathroom, like
Yeah,
that
you
that
can.
that
Yes.
that which there are many of them here, right? So somebody goes into the bathroom, when they're done, they come out and you go in. Like this whole idea of like the like the
Okay.
bathroom,
Let's leave that. Let's look about hospital. Women ward. This is the women ward.
right? Again, if we actually like dig into it deeply, right?
Mm-hmm.
What could a trans woman be looking for in the woman's word, right? Because the part of the reason why there is a woman's word in the first place is that there are, aside from privacy concerns, so okay, private
Mm-hmm.
parts, titties like vagina, yeah, she don't want like just to be open to the public. Aside from that,
Mm-hmm.
which for all intents and purposes, a trans woman would have as well. If they've
Yes.
done the medical transition, they will be
Yes.
subject to the same privacy concerns. So aside from that, there are specific like female issues, around like reproduction or just the female body parts that might require special attention and everything. So if a trans woman, by virtue of their transition, is also suffering from the same female unique medical issues that women are
Mm-hmm.
also suffering from, then they should be able to go to the women's ward. I think what you're getting at is where the tension exists is where there are limited resources and advantages that are available or prescribed solely for women,
Yes.
quote
Let's
unquote.
go back there. Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. With regards to limited opportunities available for women, programs that are directed at improving the livelihoods of women or directed at women specifically, I
Mm-hmm.
agree with the people who want to exclude trans women from those specific opportunities. Our responsibility, or what I consider my responsibility as a progressive or somebody who is as a liberal, as you say, is to make sure that the lines, because part of what trans people and their allies are concerned about is not many people are able to understand the distinction between, okay, just because we're saying that this opportunity for women doesn't include trans women, doesn't
Yes.
mean that like
They
socially
should not use
in
their initiative or be fair,
yeah,
basically.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So like even if I say, oh, okay, this opportunity in our job that is for women strictly doesn't include trans women.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't then mean that like if somebody is trans and asking me to identify them as she or
Mm-hmm.
her, that I'll now be like, well. screw you. The Supreme Court says I don't have to treat you as a woman,
Yeah.
right? Or if we're joshing around as guys physically, and it's a
Hmm.
trans person that's there, I can treat them the same way I would treat a man or something. So
I kind
there's
of
the
agree
social
with that.
aspect of things, and then there's the legal aspect, and it's important to not let to be able to identify a distinction between the legal side and how we
Mm.
relate to people like socially.
No, I
That's where
agree.
like the lines get blurred.
No, I agree with that because even with the examples that you gave, if it's under the UK Equality Act, you still can't do that either because that's still discrimination on gender reassignment. That's still
Mm.
discrimination based on gender orientation. So
Hmm.
you can't do that. Obviously, people will still do it anyway. But I'm just thinking like the leadership role because nowadays all across Europe and in the West there is this I don't know if it's a conscious or subconscious fight against diversity, equality,
Mm.
inclusion,
Mm.
right? Yes, you can say that women will also fall under the DEI, but within this same small space of women DEI, they are also trying to exclude people, So I'm just kind of wondering where is the line of this DEI, the inclusion? Do you just only include people that fall into your own thinking, or like it
I
just
mean,
gives room for more discrimination and more separation? That's the thing.
DEI is supposed to be all encompassing, right? DEI is supposed
Mm-hmm.
to basically be directed at people who, by virtue of either their material conditions or historical conditions, are denied access to opportunities, basically, white men had been province exclusively of
Mm-hmm.
white men. So that includes women, that includes minorities, that includes LGBTQ people, that includes trans people, in the LGBT Q
Yeah.
umbrella. So it's supposed to include all those. I think the Supreme Court ruling is a pretty simple, like pretty straightforward, like declaration in the sense that an opportunity, especially in the government that is
Mm-hmm.
hiring or that is promoting or that is benefiting women, quote unquote, is
Yeah.
limited to birth, like you're born a woman, biological woman.
Yes.
I agree with that position. I think it's a conflict, it's a tension that those of us on the trans side have to reckon with. But I agree with it in the sense that like quite frankly, there are limited opportunities. And I mean, and you see this type of like issue come up in other areas. So in America, for
Mm-hmm.
example, there is an ongoing kind of like historical issue between African Americans, descendants of slavery. That's what they
Mm-hmm.
call foundational Black Americans,
Yeah.
and African immigrants who are also Black, but
Yes.
blurred. So when opportunities are made available for Black people, quote unquote, in America,
Yeah.
a lot of
They
those
want to exclude.
opportunities
Yeah.
they want to exclude immigrants. So I mean, it's understand. It's normal. It's a human thing to want to make sure that your own specific
Yeah.
limited in group benefits as much as
Survival
possible from.
mentality.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, the fact that the Supreme Court says this, because all they did was just to clarify the law that we have currently. This is what it says. This is the interpretation, right? It
Mm.
doesn't mean that they still cannot work another law to kind of improve everything, right? But I just guess the conversation is there, like because for me it's just mad. The angle for me is just mad because you gave these people a certificate recognizing them as women, recognizing their gender,
Mhm.
and only for you to say, okay, actually this law does not recognize you, which means that why did you give them that certificate then? That is not recognized by the law. It's just kind of baffling to me. It's
No, I
not a
mean,
question for me to answer, but
certificate is useful for like things like if you wanna get a driver's license, you wanna fix your license to go from M
mm,
to F, if you wanna change your passports or any kind of documents, that kind of
yes.
certification is useful in that regard. But I
Hmm.
think the ruling was also really helpful because the trans right movement has a lot of power culturally. Before
Hmm.
we went live, we're joking about J.K. Rowling.
Hmm.
She is the victim of a very powerful, very focused cultural movement. That's a trans
Yeah.
movement. And one of their angles of arguments, that's the trans right movement, was to attack anybody, including Chimamanda, the example that we brought up, was
Hmm.
to attack anybody viciously who tried to make a distinction between women. And the thing that got Chimamanda into trouble, the simple sentence that trans women are not women, trans
Hmm.
women are trans women. And that
Hmm.
caused like a whole, kerfuffle. So I think
Yeah.
this Supreme Court ruling does culturally give some comfort to people like Chimamanda,
Yeah.
who,
And those for Scotland women
those
that
color
took the
women
case up. Yeah.
Yeah, and to be fair, they do have a point, right? Because the experience of womanhood is unique. And if you live your first 20 years as a man, the gender dysmorphia that you suffered that, eventually led you to turn trans, that gender dysmorphia is a completely different and unique experience from actual womanhood.
Hmm.
Um, so, like it makes sense what the women are saying. I think we just have to be careful. We just have to be
Yeah,
careful.
that's fair, but I'm just like, for me, it's just crazy because um, we talk about how mostly certain is how society affects people's behavior, and if like it has created a big debate and kerfuffle, like I said, online everywhere in the UK, radio, not everywhere, like on radio and mainstream media, they talked about it for a bit. But yeah, it just gives license to people to discriminate some more. That's just the way I
Yeah,
see it. Not maybe
that's
not
likely the outcome.
officially. Obviously, the institutions will always want to be fair. They'll still apply DEI rules, and like I said, instead of having women only bathroom, can be like a general bathroom. You go in there and use like that kind of stuff. They can change word to be just a normal word, but it's just like on a regular basis, people walking around. Like if they say, okay, I'm a woman, like someone by based on their religion can say, okay, you have brought this gender reassignment certificate to say you're a woman, but you're not a woman, so I'm not considering you as a woman because the law says you're not a woman. It just creates more opportunities for people like that to continue their, lack of a better term, dickheadry in the society.
Yeah, no, I mean, like that's where I'm saying that, like, we have to be able to make a distinction between the law side of things and what's
Mhm.
expected of us socially as decent, like, kind of human beings. So if you're looking for a license to discriminate, sure, you
Mhm.
can take it that way.
Yeah, basically the ruling, the Supreme Court, UK Supreme Court ruling draws a cultural line in the sand. But
Hmm.
at the end of the day, real identity, I would say, is messy. It does not fit into any laws, any category or form or people's intellectual capacity. If someone says
Yeah,
I'm a woman and want to feel like a woman, you cannot discriminate against them. You treat people humanly and fairly. That's what I'm going to say. But anyways, that's where I'm going to pause for today. I hope that our conversation has made you think a bit, not just about gender or politics, but the power that society has, the power
hmm.
that people has over each other in society. Okay? If you like the
Yeah,
episode, please press the like button. Subscribe if you're new or yet to do so. Follow the podcast if you're listening on audio platforms and tell someone about it. Don't try to convince them, but just have a conversation and see where they stand. All right? Until next time,
hmm.
I'm going to say thank you to Mr. Seun T for joining us on this one.
No worries,
And
man.
I really enjoyed the conversation. It actually made me give me more ideas for future shows as well. So thank you for that. All
No
right.
worries.
Until next time, I like to say, stay safe, stay curious, question everything,
Hmm.
and use your brain. SCFR. Peace.